Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. I'm David Lott, Director of Customer Success at Spekit. Welcome to another episode of Spekit Sauces, where we discuss and share the secret sauces to empowering your team from today's leading digital transformation, sales enablement, operations, and learning professionals. Today, we're hosting our very first Ask the Expert episode of Spekit Sauces with Brad Gross, CPQ expert, Salesforce Hall of Famer, and all-around rock star. Brad, you want to introduce yourself?
All right, thanks, David. Appreciate the invitation. Yeah, as David said, I've been doing Salesforce for about 20 years, and been an evil consultant for probably the past 15. But quite frankly, the most thing I'm trying to do right now is trying to teach myself how to still get my heels down while doing downward facing dog and yoga. So I got a long ways to go still, but appreciate the invite.
Awesome. And so Brad and I met by ways of the Salesforce ecosystem, of course. But what we did was, since we have a number of customers on CPQ or getting ready to roll out CPQ or programming CPQ, we thought it would be best to, number one, learn from the best and learn from the experts. And so my team got a firsthand schooling on CPQ from Brad, but then together we also put together our CPQ 101 package in Spekit. So we talked about a lot of the things that end users are dealing with when they're learning or using CPQ for the first time, from how to build a quote to what all of that entails, to how to edit those things, to what pricing looks like, to what packaging and scheduling and bundling and all of those great things look like. And so we do have a lot of really great out of the box content in Spekit, and it helps, I would say, with the complexity that can be CPQ. Right. And so I think that there is definitely an understanding that CPQ has a way of being complex and can be just a more complex part of Salesforce to manage. But the nice part about talking to Brad is that he's got a way of simplifying all of that and making it not so complex and helping folks really understand how to use CPQ, why to use CPQ, right? And sort of the best methods. So we'll jump into a little bit of that with a leading question here. But number one, Brad, why don't you share with us from your perspective, right? Tell us why CPQ, right? Tell us like a little bit about why people should be going down the route of CPQ versus just Sales Cloud.
Okay. Well, why don't I do a little. Get a little slide action here going, and
never shied away from a little slide.
Let me just do a little slide action here. So I apologize. I want to zoom in a little bit here because I don't want to necessarily go through sharing my screen here. But let me just use this screen right here. Really goes into the whys. If you are coming from pure Salesforce, and then you are evaluating what's available inside of Sales Cloud versus what's available, and this one is using Salesforce CPQ, but really any good quote generation, configure price quote tool. Where you typically are looking at is you look at these first four things. And for Salesforce CPQ in particular, it's these four. So standard Sales Cloud has a very flat product table versus CPQ, you have this concept of a bundle. And while you can try to do some pseudo bundles, yes, there's some stuff on the App Exchange to give you some bundling functionality. There are things that Salesforce CPQ can do with bundles in terms of a rules engine, in terms of how to make sure that you're validating and doing some really great and complex configuration that it's hard to build by yourself. It's easier to use an application like CPQ. So product bundles becomes a big thing. Secondly, if you're an organization that sells and does contracting, so I'm going to rent out a service. It's a lot for very good service organizations. If I'm selling a product with support, another good reason to have contracting. So you have contracts, and typically those contracts have the ability to be amended halfway through a 3-year deal. I want to change what I'm selling or what the customer actually has purchased. So CPQ has that ability to just do the proration and do amendments a whole lot faster than you could try to do this manually. Third one is if you're going to do, when you have that contract, you want to do renewals. So there has to be some sort of automation. I want to make sure that my renewal is in my sales forecast. I want my renewals to be up to date based upon how often I amend. That's where contract renewals comes into play with the auto contract updates. And the fourth reason typically says, I sell not a service, but a product. I want to make sure that I have these assets sitting there ready to go. And that's where automatic asset creation comes into play. I can create my assets and then have that also be connected to Service Cloud. So now I can use my entitlements that are available within Service Cloud and be able to apply those automatically. And Salesforce CPQ does those 4 things. So typically you're looking at those 4.
Right, right. Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense when it's that clear, right? Especially for a robust sales org, a lot of products or anything like that. One of the biggest challenges, obviously, is that it's highly customized, right? And of course it is. And that's also why we worked on some of that packaging together about what are the things that are common across users and the things that they experience. But what I loved about learning from you was the way you were able to simplify that into a delicious metaphor that whets my appetite each and every time we talk about CPQ. So like, can you show us what CPQ is through the lens of a burrito?
Yeah, let's do that. So before I get into the burrito, I'd like to show this as my capability map. And if you think about it, I'll get to the, I promise you there's going to be a guacamole.
Sorry, I get super
I promise guacamole, I promise. But the thing about the reason why I show this first off is these are all the things that CPQ can do if you sit on top of Sales Cloud. So a lot of these functions are CPQ specific, but some of them have CPQ like reports and dashboards. Hey, that's Sales Cloud. That's what Salesforce is going to do for us. But if you think about it, there's a lot of functionality here, and it's too much to get through. I mean, this takes hours, and no one wants to do it. And they really just want to see how CPQ works, and that really comes back to that first concept, which was bundles. And so that's where we get to the burrito. So if you think about it, now I'm already inside of CPQ. I've already skipped a number of steps. But if you think about it, if I'm sitting there and I go to my burrito shop, I'm going to have to ask a bunch of questions. How would you like it wrapped? What do you want inside of it? How much can I put in here? If you notice here, I say I can choose 1, but I cannot have anything more than 5. If I were to pick 6 and hit save, I'm going to get an error. These are those functions I say, like the rules engine, I control this. And this is all point and click. And so when you think about me picking out what I want to do here, I'm going to pick 4 here. Kind of strange. I'm going to pick a spice just because I want to. And then if I go to, I got to pick no more than this. But then I can do extras, right? I can have more stuff if I want to. And then I can also go in here and add in size and utensils. But you're trying to get to this idea of, I have control of, as an admin, I am controlling the user's experience. And so we like to think about, I've already gone through a product and I'm going to configure this bundle, and I'm using this as a experience of having good decisions and keeping people on a happy path, a preferred path for having good configurations that don't necessarily break business rules.
Right.
And so now when I save this.
Right. Nobody comes running out of the kitchen and say, we can't do that. We can't put chips.
Sell it.
Right. You can't sell it. Right.
You cannot put Diet Coke inside the burrito. That's not going to be allowed. So that's one of those things where you try to look at that and you go, let's keep everybody in the right path. And you'll notice that the pricing's already working. Stuff's been included. There's some stuff that was included. There's some stuff that's extra, but I still have a good price.
Right.
And this interface gives me that ability to stay on that path. Now, I can make this a whole lot more complicated if I want to, but I don't have to.
Right.
I can keep my widgets and sell it, and I have an easy burrito. And when most people think of CPQ, this is what they want. This is what most people want to see, because this is what the users are typically working with primarily.
Right.
Configuration page.
And it keeps the end user in line with their options, what they can offer, what they can sell, and how to sell it. And then it keeps like the business satisfied with all of their rules being met and the things that people have authority to do and not authority to do, which leads to the fact that you can build in discounting schedules and parameters for end users where you can create business rules for the things that they can and cannot do without approval, correct?
Yeah, and more, it's great. Great points out here. It's like, for example, here's a discount schedule. Let's see if it loads. I'll bring it back, and it usually pops a little bit faster. I can have discounts. I can add in more functionality. But what most people forget about is to say, I can make this myself. You could, but you'd have to program. Now you're going to create a whole bunch of technical debt. I'd rather have somebody else manage that technical debt for me if at all possible. If I have unique customizations, of course I can build on top of this. But the tool is built on records and fields. So I don't have as much technical debt. Salesforce is responsible for it and gives me more functionality than it would take me to actually build right away. Right. That's where and so like a discount schedule. If I buy 2, I get 50 cents off. That's cool. That's functionality you didn't think about before.
Right.
I can create some favorites. I have drawers in here. I have all kinds of functionality that most people do not normally get, which I enjoy. And then, but as you pointed out before, David, CPQ is complicated. How do I learn? How do I use the tool the easiest as a user? What's the best way for me to actually use the tool? And I think that's where Spekit really comes into play.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That leads or segues perfectly into for teams that are actually thinking about CPQ or they're actually rolling it out for the first time.
Yeah.
What are the top 2 or 3 things that you would recommend for those teams?
I'm so glad I was able to be prepped for this call. When I'm an enable consultant, I do CPQ work. What we typically will do when we start out with new people who are interested in CPQ, one of the very first things that we will send them is a pretty long list of questions. If you think about it, and you can read my screen if you want to, these are all typical questions that we ask. There may be more, there may be less, but we actually have a fairly decent sized questionnaire because we ask people, they always think about CPQ as this discrete element. They think about it as just this screen. But what we need to get them to think about is your experience begins the moment that I create my opportunity and usually ends either when I create an order or an invoice or a contract. Even if you go all the way to the invoice, it's not something that comes out of the box from CPQ, but you probably do have an invoicing engine. NetSuite, SAP, Oracle, QuickBooks, you have stuff. So you have to think through that entire lead to cash functionality. And so that's why when we talk about CPQ, this capability map starts to come more in play. Mm-hmm. What parts of the system are you actually needing? Do you use, what parts of the things do you need today? And then what happens when you need to think 12 months down the road, 18 and 36 months down the road? Where do you want to take the organization? And that's really where a CPQ function comes into play. So when we do scoping,
it's like leveling up your strategy, essentially.
What's that, David?
It's like leveling up your strategy, essentially.
Yeah.
It's like, have you thought about these implications? If not, let's think about them. Right.
Now's the time.
Right. Exactly.
This is going to be a very core component. And if you're coming from another quoting tool to CPQ, let's figure out the right ones, the right things that you want to keep. And what are the time? This is the moment to actually change some of those business processes that are getting a little stale and get ready for the next step.
Yep.
So we typically would ask. Now, there's a lot of questions here. From everything from, do you need a bundling strategy? How do you approve? How do you handle approvals? How do you handle year-over-year price increases? There's a lot of questions. What are the big ones? And so this is the next slide we typically show. And we have a better way of asking this question, but if you think about it, it's usually they start with these 4. Mm-hmm. What's your product catalog like? What are you quoting today? What does your product catalog look like today? Where do you want your product catalog to go? And where is the growth pattern going to be? Where am I going to be growing? Where am I going to be shrinking? Mm-hmm. What products do I want to end of life? What products do I need to roll people to? What's your strategy there? The second would be pricing. How do you price? CPQ has some ways of doing pricing. You have ways of doing pricing. Let's make sure the 2 match. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that. And talking about your pricing strategy and understanding your pricing strategy. Some people say, I'll take, it's a bundled idea concept, just like my burrito. Some people say, I put everything in as cost of the company, and then we mark it up 20%, and that's how we sell to customers. CPQ can do that. There's different ways of pricing. So we like to know what your pricing master is today and where I want to go. The one thing most people do not have are your flowcharts. What's your business processes? How do you handle sales? How does information travel from point A to point C? Mm-hmm. How do I handle ordering? How do I handle contracting? This is where CPQ is going to live. It's helpful to know that process and make sure that you have that figured out. You're going to do approvals. That's a big time. Now's the time to do it. There is some packages. There is a package from CPQ called Advanced Approvals. Gives you a little bit more functionality. There's some the big one says is that I can have 3 approvals going on at the same time on one quote. In standard Salesforce, I have to serialize it.
Oh, wow.
I can have my financial, my legal, and my sales approvals all happening at the same time. And that's a big feature of advanced approvals. Yeah. So if you need that functionality, let's talk about it. And then finally, usually where people start, it says, what does your output documents look like? Mm-hmm. Let's start from there and let's work our way back.
Right.
And that's really how people really start thinking through CPQ. And if you ever think about doing billing, which is next, I think we'll get there. We're going to get there eventually. Salesforce billing. We usually start the invoice with the customer and figure out how you invoice products and then back things up. Right. So these are the basics. If you came armed with these 4 things, 5 things, I can't count. Must be the end of my day. 5 things, then you would have a much greater and better experience in implementing CPQ or any quoting tool.
Right. Let me ask a sort of loaded question there, which is, number one, how many people are scared off because they think I'm not sophisticated enough, I don't have these rules yet?
Yeah.
Like where I would say, you shouldn't be scared off because there's a lot of ways to start building that kind of engine, right? And then the other side to that is, how many people are like, I'm coming to you with like a product catalog that's so big and so dense, I don't even think we could build the rules around it, right? Because we have a legacy business and we've got physical assets and whatever, right? All that complexity that comes with it. So how do we get them to make the best out of CPQ?
Yeah.
Right?
Let's answer the complex question first, and then we'll get to the simple question. Sure. So complex. We have worked with product catalogs that have tens of thousands of products in them. CPQ can do that. That's not necessarily the problem. The question is, how do you want users to use the tool to be effective? And that's usually where the big conversation comes in. So that's the first one. If you're simple, it's like, hey, this sounds really complex. Where do I start? Obviously, there's some trailheads. Obviously, there's consulting partners like Traction on Demand, who I work for. We can help you guide. We can give you some guidance and help you along the way. There's 2 ways of doing that, but really get in there, try it out, see how it works for you, and then come prepared. We really do like people who are well armed, and that's why we usually do send out these questions well in advance. If you sign on with us, we send you a whole worksheet with presentation and tasks that says, here's all of your homework that you have to get ready for. And that way you come armed and prepared. Now you know your processes, you know your catalog, all the data is ready and contained, and now we can do a very strong implementation.
Right. That's awesome. So when people are coming to you from another quoting system, just out of curiosity, like what typically is not working for them that CPQ is then going to do?
The great question, David. Typically the reason is either A, the system is not quoting correctly. Mm-hmm. So just bad calculations. The system's going end of life. Right. It's too complicated. It requires too much programming. There's a lot of coding tools out there that have a very, very strong coding requirement. So to customize it, right. CPQ doesn't have as strong of a coding requirement. So people switch to that. Some people don't like how the system actually does billing or how it handles subscriptions or how it handles products every year. They want a smarter model. Sometimes it's just practically down to license cost. There's a couple good reasons why people would switch over to Salesforce CPQ, but those are usually the big ones.
All right. Good to know. We have a couple of questions that came in from attendees. So let's get to some of those with some of our remaining time here.
Cool.
Unless there was anything else you wanted to.
No, let's go for it. I like questions.
Awesome. So first question here is, what are the most important first questions you want answered before you build any CPQ solution? And I know you've gone through that slide,
Sure.
but maybe pop it up one more time as a response
Happy
to
to.
the question, and just let's highlight a couple of key points
Yeah, the
here.
big ones.
Yeah.
So really the big ones that the big ones that scare us more of the times than not is, do you have a need for a bundling strategy? How often is your pricing changing? Who is currently managing your pricing?
Mhm.
Is usually a big one. We always ask these two questions because they usually point to further problems down the line that say, how often is your team spending? How often is your team spending to correctly configure a quote? Is it taking forever? Let's figure out why. Love to know that answer. How often are the quotes inaccurate? Even if you're using another tool, it's sometimes interesting to see how often is pricing accuracy. I'm just coming off of a project where the client still was trying to, they had to do, I'm not making up the number. I promise you this number is for reals. They were doing 160 checks for every quote to be certain that the numbers were accurate because they didn't trust what the tool was providing them. They're like, can we fix this? Well, yes, I would hope that we can. And so that's a big one. And so we start to figure out where the pain points are. And that's really where we start to. So we talked about the 5 big questions from before that you're usually going into. If you notice here, the big theme on this has been experience.
Right.
Experiencing the lead to cash, the quoting solution, because that's where people really need to spend their time, because that's usually where most people are saying, just please fix this.
Right.
Just make this better.
And who's coming to you generally? Are those product owners, or are they really more finance folks?
It's a mix. It's usually 50-50, David. So you'll see some sales leaders coming through, then you'll see some operations and finance teams coming through. Mm-hmm. It is a mix, but who makes that final decision? It truly is half and half.
Well, it needs to be owned by both for it to be successful, right? Essentially.
It does help. Yes. It does help if you have both groups of those people in there. Well, and it's usually surprising. I did a project about a year or so ago, and you had 7 or 8 different business units, 7 or 8 different groups within the company, all talking to each other, from legal to finance to business operations and sales operations. And none of these people had actually really talked together about how Salesforce and coding really worked. They never really had that opportunity to talk. We're talking for the first time. We're all in the same room together. It was really they were like, why would we do this? And then we got going in the project, like, why haven't we done this before? This is so great.
Yeah, we see that a lot with customers as well, especially in the space that we're in. It's amazing once you get the right arm talking to the left arm. Essentially, that's it. And when it is set up correctly, it does do such powerful things for organizations. It gives so much insight, so much flexibility, and so much power to the end user, to the salesperson, to be able to own their own process.
Yeah, I like it. I've been doing this now for 4 years. I didn't think I would ever get into this business, this part of Salesforce, but I get a kick out of it because you typically are solving complex business problems.
Right.
And that's the fun part, is you sit there and try to think through how can I be solving this better? And that's fun. That's the fun part of being in consulting.
It must be, because the people who have the complex problems are like, this could never get solved.
And that's what we get paid to do. We get paid to solve the problems. It's kind of fun.
On that note, what somebody asked about, it sounds like we have a user, but any tips for product family architecture?
Oh, okay. So let's do that. Let me share that screen. Let me go back. I keep sharing my screen and turning off my screen, but let me share this out.
Name of the game.
Let's do a little bundle. Let's do a little bundle discussion here. So let's actually break apart the burrito product briefly.
A deconstructed burrito.
A deconstructed burrito. It's just a salad by another name. All right. So if you think about how what we saw before, we had the tabs on the top, and we walked people through that experience, and they picked what I wanted. So CPQ 101 says, I have features, which are the folders that hold stuff. and I have options, which are the stuff inside. So I like to use the illustration of an accordion folder to describe a bundle. So the burrito is my accordion folder. Then I have features, the salsas, the sides, the proteins, the dairy. Those are my features. And then I have my options. So in terms of a bundling strategy, you typically ask the questions in terms of what items can I pick one of? Okay, so you saw at the beginning, I could pick from either the white tortilla or the whole wheat tortilla. I could pick one or the other. Let's put those into features. That's the first step of a bundling strategy. Second bundling strategy is which areas do I want to make sure that they are always included? What items do I want to be certain that I can just push along to the side? Which ones are required and not, and so users can have some more control. And that's where the option strategy comes into play. So something like this egg, so a product option, I have it included in both my proteins and in my extras. So I have two product options that I'm going into two different features. It's the same product, but because of how I'm using it, this one, I have a quantity of one, it's not selected, it's not required, but the pricing is there, versus if I very quickly try to find the egg product, again, I'm just go and look at all of my options. Here it is here's my other product option. My egg used a second time. It's on proteins, it's bundled. And the bundled checkbox is true on this one where it wasn't before. This means that no matter what the price of egg is, it doesn't apply. I am including them in the cost of my bundle, of my burrito bundle. So in terms of bundling strategy, you usually try to figure out major groupings, which we call features, individual product options, and then how do I want to price it and how do I want to control it? And that's usually where we start coming up with a good bundle strategy. And then we talk about finally after that, we talk about how we want to renew it. So if this was a product that I would renew, how does that get applied? And how do I want to make certain that when I replace one product with another within my bundle, because bundles are going to change over time, how do I make certain that I have an easy transition? Right. So those are usually the big discussions that we have. And to be honest, David, if you have a very complex product catalog, it takes a while to come up with a good solid structure that applies all of your pricing as best as possible without requiring custom code.
And if you have a complex structure like that, is there a suggestive cross-sell application there? Like, I want my reps to know that egg is a great sort of add-on here for this type of burrito.
Yeah. There are going to be some Einstein bots coming that are going to help with that kind of piece. And then you can also within the interface, you can kind of hint at people. You can change some descriptions and you can put some suggestions in the system. You can also cross things out. There's this concept of a product rule that says if I pick egg, I can't pick a sweet potato because the combination's weird. Right. I can actually force things to be turned off and on automatically behind the scenes, again, to keep people down a preferred path.
Right. Awesome. I'm sufficiently starving, but we have one more minute here, so I'll give you one more question while we got you. Somebody asked if you have any recommendation for process tools to deploy changes related to CPQs, such as product and rule setup.
Oh, yeah. So the one that I really like in terms of, CPQ being a very records-based configuration, you'll notice I've got price rule tab and a product rule tab. These are all records inside of Salesforce. Mm-hmm. So your typical deployments are going to be very records heavy. So there's a tool out there called Proudly Mover, Prodly. It's great. Does a lot of that does a lot of that dirty work for you on a very consistent basis. Had a lot of success with Proudly. Traction uses a tool called GearSet. GearSet's great because it will also move your field data as well as some of your core data. Depends on your price points and what you want to use. But yeah, we have great success with both of those.
Awesome. Good to know. These are great questions. Thank you from the attendees. And thank you, Brad, for joining us on Spekit Sauces today. This was great chat. I know I enjoy it every single time. And again, my stomach is growling, so I appreciate that as always.
I'm here for.
Right. Do you want to talk a little bit, just mention how people can reach out to you if they have additional questions or just want to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Easiest way is to get me on Twitter. And just now I'm going to make you thirsty. My Twitter handle is Imperial Stout, like the beer.
Right.
So that's my Twitter handle. Reach me out there. I'm at Traction on Demand. It's who I work for. We're a Vancouver-based Salesforce consulting shop. Do it all. But tractionondemand.com is a good place to learn more information about the CPQ practice.
Awesome. And if you have questions about Spekit or want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or just david@spekit.co is a good way to email me as well. But thanks again, Brad. I'm only sorry that we're actually not going to sit down and have an Imperial Stout and a burrito right now, because that'd be the best way to wrap this thing up.
I did not come prepared for that.
Awesome. But thank you for being prepared in all other ways. And thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned for the next episode of Spekit Sauces. Check our Spekit website, check the marketing channel, check our Twitter. We're doing these all the time. And so stay tuned and see what's next. All right. Thanks for attending, everybody.